Okay, so I'm in this super boring meeting about something, I don't know, wasn't paying attention. Then, boom! It was like an ugly contest where everyone was a winner. This one dude was all, raw, so I shot him, and then I shot this other one, shot a couple extra guys just to be safe. I did a lot of shooting, if I'm being totally honest. Then, they destroyed my favorite store. Second favorite. There's that spicy ramen shop. I'm getting sidetracked. Look, long story short, I get busy. And I'm thinking, I've got this. You know, when you're in that, you go, I got this. But man, I so did not have it. Guess you have to be there. Well, better get back to it.
Hi, this is Mothermantiss. I have been playing Destiny for the last few months. I spent about 3 months getting caught up on the old campaigns, the old story, and then when Witch Queen came out a couple weeks ago, I played through the campaign on Classic, I played through the campaign on Legendary, and I played bits and pieces of some of the missions on Legendary Solo just to get an idea of what that felt like. I feel like I have a pretty good idea of what the story is in Destiny now, and I think the combat is an absolute blast. The game is a lot of fun to play with friends, and I think the game has a lot to recommend it. I also think, however, that the game makes it so terribly hard for a new player to get assimilated and connected into the game, and I just do not understand why Bungie has made some of the decisions that they've made. It's almost like they don't want the $100 it will take to pull the trigger on the paid version of the game. I don't get it. The game itself is absolutely gorgeous, and the combat is a blast. But there are some real issues in terms of trying to get new players into the game that I really wish that they would address. Let's talk about it. Let me first say, I love Destiny, and I'm not going to bash it. What I am going to do is talk about what I think needs the most improvement from the perspective of a new player who wants to continually improve, but is not a sweaty Dan and will never be an elite player, which, if we're being honest, is most of us. Oh, and if after hearing me out, you would hit the like and subscribe button, I would appreciate it very, very much. And letting the video play in full at least once is also very, very helpful to me, and I thank you for that. So Bungie has tried to blend the looter shooter with a feeling of an MMORPG. And I say that because the game doesn't just put forth a premise and a setting and then tell you to have at it. No, there's actually a pretty comprehensive lore and ongoing, unfolding storyline that's reasonably well written and very well voice acted. And there has clearly been some thought and effort into encouraging the player to become attached to the story and to care about the Vanguard and the last city and what is happening to them and to it and to humanity. So I think it's fair to look at the game in the context of both genres, at least to some degree. Because they lean hard into the RPG element and story, the lore matters, and to my surprise, it's actually pretty decent. I don't think, however, that Bungie does a respectable job of working that into the game for new players, at all. Which leads me to my first, and yes, I'm starting with my first and most important point. Coming back or newly into Destiny as a blueberry is very challenging. It's very confusing. Now, I was lucky for two reasons. One, I had a group to play with, one of whom has been playing since the early days, and she has been a lifesaver in explaining everything from mechanics in-game to build considerations to story context. When we're seeing a cutscene that's clearly supposed to mean something to us, but in fact we have no idea who these people are. And two, I played through the Red War campaign a few years ago, so I already had a very basic understanding of what the Traveler is, why it's important, what are Guardians, what's the last city. Because I played the Red War, I also had some context for who Zavala, Ikora, and the rest of the Vanguard are, and I already had some level of attachment to them. The old intro and tutorial bit immediately established the setting, provided some context, you met and fought alongside the Vanguard, which helped you connect to them, and did a good job of establishing why Guardians are important and how dire the situation is for humanity and how bad the situation in the last city has become. When you finished the old intro and then the Red War campaign, you came out of it feeling completely invested, and it set the stage for all of the expansions after it. I do comprehend the reasoning for removing some areas of the game later in an effort to keep the game size down or whatever, but removing the entire beginning and the first campaign has really only served to disconnect the story from the gameplay, and it's made it almost impossible for a new player to feel invested at all. And an invested player spends time and money. And isn't that what you want? As it is now, the new player lands in the Cosmodrome and then they make their way to Shawhan without knowing what the hell is going on, without any understanding of the urgency the characters are expressing, or any context of this being a defeated, last dregs of humanity struggling to rebuild, or anything really. It's just massively confusing. There is so little explanation or guidance. And then you show up in the tower, and it's clear that you're supposed to have a relationship with Zavala, Ikora, and the others, but you have zero context, so they just come off as random vendors trying to sell you stuff, which I think does them a big disservice. And if you do drop the $100 or so to buy all the expansions, the sheer amount of mission icons that pop up on the maps is overwhelming and disheartening, because you have no idea what you're supposed to be focusing on, what things might be best done early to save yourself a fat headache later when you have to then drop the mission string you're following and go back and do a crap ton of side missions to unlock something that you had no idea early on that you would need later. So in addition to having to research the story to have any comprehension of what's going on, they've also removed any semblance of cohesion in presenting that story to you. You'll have to constantly research combat and build items, and not just in the fun way of, for instance, looking for a great new build put up by your favorite creator. The combat in Destiny is really fun, especially with friends, but I have never met another game that was so poor at explaining systems that you have to regularly leave the game to research how this or that works. Here's one example. You'll find out fairly early on that there's a big focus on build, weapons, and mods for armor and weapons, but trying to figure out where to get mods, how they work, how some mods only work with certain subclasses, and even who sells them is a giant fat headache. For instance, I didn't even know Xur existed for literally weeks, or that he appears at random places in the world. It just makes no sense. I got lucky when I started playing a few months ago because I started with a few other new players and one very experienced player. And let me tell you, having her to explain things and point us in the right direction was massive to our assimilation into and enjoyment of the game. 3 years ago, I quit Destiny after about 6 or 8 weeks and finishing the early campaign because trying to figure out stuff all by yourself sucks. The game is abysmal at helping newbies, so if they don't happen to have in-game friends to help them, it can be a dismal experience where you end up like the kid looking in at the toy store through the window. You can see that it's magical in there, and the other kids look like they're having great fun, but you cannot get in unless one of them comes out and gets you. That's just a bit sad. As much as I can see why people love the game, including myself, I do find it dismaying that in order to understand what on earth is happening, you have to do a lot of outside the game research. I've tried to introduce Destiny to several people who are perfectly willing to spend money on the full expansion pack and spend money on in-game silly doodads at Eververse, but I cannot get them to stick with it through the awful early slog that is the learning process. Why, Bungie? Why do you do this to new players? And on the topic of spending money, why, when you spend all that money on the full meal deal with all the past expansions and seasons, etc., do you not get access to the season goodies that came with that season? I say this for a reason. A new player with no armor or mod inventory, trying to gear up, looking at videos on YouTube with all kinds of great builds, researching what kind of hero they want to be, will end up beating their heads against a wall because so many of the builds feature exotics and in particular mods that were released in past seasons, and getting them now is a complete RNG nightmare. I understand that certain things like exotics maybe have to be earned, yeah, but let us earn them. Don't put them behind some random RNG vendor wall where we have to run to Ada or whoever every day, hoping that today might be the day when we can purchase this or that mod for our chosen build. There's enough to deal with in this game in terms of learning technique and working towards certain gear drops that hobbling the learning experience behind the utter chance of having a mod show up at Ada just seems kind of petty and gatekeeperish. Now, having said all this, I also want to say, again, I love the game. In fact, I'm rather addicted to it right now. The new expansion, Witch Queen, definitely tries harder to immerse and encourage the player to care about the story. Most of the reviews I've seen, though, are by veteran players, and while I agree with them that it's a fantastic expansion, I don't think it changes the points I'm making about the onboarding experience for a new player who has zero context on the game world and wants to care about the story and characters that Bungie has clearly put a lot of effort into making worth caring about. I mean, you can regard Destiny as a simple looter-shooter, and all the story is just a premise for shooting at things, but I suspect that the devs care more about the story than that, and I know that there are a lot of people who would love the game and the story if they had a fair introduction to it. To be clear, I love Destiny 2, and I'll be shortly doing another video on what makes Destiny so fantastic. I just want more people to love it as well, and I wish that Bungie would make that easier. That's my take on this. Thanks, and enjoy your day.
This is great. Anyone want a hug? No hugs.